Going into my middle school years was rough. We used to live in Los Angeles, but my dad had found a better paying job in New Jersey. It was my first day of school. I was absolutely dreading it because I was in 7th grade, and it was the middle of the year, so everybody had their friend group sorted out already, and I knew that I wouldn't have anybody to talk to because I was a pretty shy kid at the time. The first hour or two were the worst because we all gathered in the common area for morning meeting, and everybody would be sitting with their friends, and I was just awkwardly sitting on the side with nobody near me. The rest of the school day was pretty normal, if you can even call the first day at a new school normal. I hadn't said a single word to anybody so far, and that made me think sarcastically, wow, what a start. After third period ended, it was time for lunch. I was dreading it because I knew that I wouldn't have anybody to sit with. I always had this irrational fear of being alone, that it was bad for me to be sitting alone, or that if somebody caught me sitting alone, they would think of me as bad or creepy. Anyways, I walked into the cafeteria, and I was confused to see that not a single table had a space to sit. Great. Now I'd have to sit on the floor. But in the far left corner, there was a table with only 3 people sitting there. The table sounded pretty quiet, which is just what I preferred. No vocal interactions, just being able to eat and unwind. I know, I was pretty antisocial. I went over there and realized that the 3 boys that were sitting there actually waved me over. I found that a kind gesture and I obliged. The 3 boys introduced themselves enthusiastically when I sat down. I introduced myself as well. They were Mark, Andy, and Tyler. Their kind and approachable behavior made me feel better, and we immediately started talking. They asked me if I was new, and we kind of went off from there. I realized how lucky I actually was to have met these guys, because without them, I would probably be sitting alone. We talked about random stuff. At the end of the lunch period, I'd completely forgotten that I was new just because of how pleasant of a conversation I was having. Right as the bell rang for next period, Andy suggested that I take his number so that we could catch up later. Luckily, I had my backpack, so I wrote it down on a post-it note. I told him that I would text him later. Mark offered that we meet up at the ice cream shop in downtown. I playfully asked where that was because I was still learning the little town that we lived in. They told me where it was and we went our separate ways. I just realized how amazing this was. I was already making friends. After I went home, I decided to text Andy. I texted him saying, "Hey, what's up?" Within 5 minutes, he responded back, "Hey, who is this?" I told him that it was me, and then he said, "Who?" I told him again that it was me, and he said, "Oh, yeah." I found that a little bizarre because how would he forget me that fast? I literally only met him 3 hours ago, but I brushed it off. I thought that it'd be cool to invite the 3 over so that we could play Call of Duty on my PlayStation, so I texted him if they wanted to come over. He said he and the others were down and asked for my address. I gave it to him and he said he'd be over soon. Luckily, my parents were not home that night because they were looking for other better houses in the area because they didn't like where we were now, so we could really be as loud as we wanted because nobody would be home. Just as I was powering up my PlayStation, I got a knock at the door downstairs. I excitedly ran down the stairs going to get the door, but looked through the peephole first. There was some random man on my stoop. I assumed that it was just some marketer, so I pretended to not be home. To be honest, the man looked a little creepy and on the older side. He looked to be in his early 50s, and he had short gray hair, and he was tall, probably around 6'5". I went back upstairs to setting up my game console. Right then and there, I heard a massive crash downstairs. It sounded like a window broke. Right away, I realized what was going on. That creepy man had broken into my house. Panicking, I ran to the door to lock it. I turned off the lights and the PlayStation and hid in my closet. The man was pacing around downstairs, opening and closing the kitchen cabinets, completely trashing the place. He was throwing plates and cups out of the cabinets. Right then, just as I feared he would, he went up the stairs. The door to my room was the first door on the left up the stairs. I heard every single step in slow motion. His manic footsteps approaching were bone-chilling. Then he tried the doorknob. When he realized it was locked, he started screaming while banging on the door. This was the most tense moment of my life. I took out my phone that was in my pocket and dialed 911 while I was freaking out and the man was screaming demonically and banging at the door. Something else also fell out of my pocket when I pulled out my phone. That post-it note that I used to write down Andy's number. I put it on my lap. As I was on the phone with the operator, I took the time to go text Sandy. I looked at the post-it note and then at Andy's phone number. Then I realized the last number that I put into my phone was wrong. It was supposed to be a 7, not a 6. Then as I put 2 and 2 together, I realized what was going on. That only made the whole situation a lot worse. I yelled at the operator to send the cops. In hindsight, that was a bad idea, because there's no chance that whoever that sick person was behind my bedroom door would stop because he would know that I'm in the closet now. Then the door broke down. The maniac had actually broken down the door. I sat in utter silence and fear as he started pacing around the room while breathing heavily. Then, at the worst possible time, I got a text My phone dinged as one of my friends texted me. I clenched my teeth as I felt my entire world just stop. I knew it. I was gonna die. That would be my last night alive. But then, by some stroke of luck, there was a voice yelling police at the front door. I didn't say anything because that would give away my position. Then that man who was in my room opened the window and jumped out to the deck on the bottom floor. I heard a horde of police officers running over and tackling him outside. I thought it was a good idea to get out now. I exited my room with my hands up, and one of the officers questioned me about what just happened. From the backyard, I saw 3 officers who had the sick man in cuffs. He was still screaming like a maniac and resisting the cops. I called my parents and explained what happened, and they came back home promptly. I also texted Andy, the real Andy, about what happened, and he replied with, "That's insane." This only brought me and my new friends closer together, and after my story became known in the school, more and more people started talking to me. Even though I'm making more friends now, I'm still mentally scarred for life. Even when I'm sleeping in my room and my mom's walking up the stairs, it sends shivers down my spine, bringing back dormant memories of when that sick man broke into my house. Something very scary happened to me a couple weeks ago. First of all, I'm 13 and I'm in 8th grade. It was a Friday, and I was taking the bus back home. My school was pretty far from my house, so I'd usually get bored on the bus. I would mostly watch YouTube videos and text friends. On this particular day, I didn't have my phone because I'd stupidly lost it somewhere. I felt stupid for having left my phone somewhere because I always used it and it was always with me. When the bus dropped me off at home, I asked my mom if I could use her phone to call one of my friends. After all, it was a Friday night, so it would be cool to hang out. My best friend was this guy named Luke. We hung out all the time at school because all the other people that were near us were pretty weird, so we really only had each other to talk to. Call me lonely or whatever. I dialed his number and called him. I greeted him with a, "Hey, what's up?" And then he said, "Oh, hey man, what's up?" I asked him if he wanted to hang out later, and he said sure. I asked if we should meet at the new burger joint downtown, and he said he was down. It was a rather relaxing night because I had no homework, and I had the whole night free, and the next day would be the weekend. After a couple hours of playing video games, I jumped on my bike and biked over to downtown. I lived pretty close to the center of the town, so it was never really a problem to hang out with friends. Luke lives on the other side of town, so he wasn't too far, but it is still too far to bike, and my parents were working at home, and his parents weren't home, but we still just decided to meet in town because his house was pretty far from mine for biking. I took a right turn near the burger place and saw him at the end of the block. I waved him over. I greeted him and asked him if he wanted to go get something to eat. He said yes, and we biked over to the burger place. We got some takeout and biked over to the park to sit down at one of the benches. When we sat down, we just started talking about random things like school, life, and video games. Then he asked me something strange. He asked me if I was still going to sleep over at his house. I gave him a weird look. It's not that I didn't want to sleep over, but he never invited me, and I never asked him if I could sleep over. I said, "What?" Then he said, "Dude, you texted me like an hour ago if you could sleep over." My heart dropped. I had not found my phone. What really made my skin crawl was that I just turned off the passcode to my phone, so anybody who found my phone could get into it. Even worse, I had both of our addresses on the phone. Some random person had found my phone and was going to Luke's house. My heart started racing as I tried to explain to Luke about what was happening. We both started freaking out. He told me to go back with him to his house to help him. As much as I didn't want to bike all the way over there, I had to help him. We got to his house. We saw 2 broken windows indicating that the intruder had already left the house. We entered through the front door and found his whole house had been completely trashed. The cabinets in the kitchen were open, and all of the plates, cups, and silverware were all on the floor. The TV was taken from the living room, and the couch cushions were moved around. There was a really bad smell in the house, something so bad it was borderline unbearable. It seemed to be coming from the living room. We paced around and looked to see where the smell was coming from. Then I heard the blood-curdling and gut-wrenching scream come from Luke's mouth. I turned around and screamed at him to tell me what was going wrong. Then, he pushed the couch to the side, and that revealed the bloody corpse of his older brother. He and I threw up, literally, right then and there. This wasn't a decaying corpse. This was a freshly killed corpse. Luke and I ran out of the house pretending as though we were not just mentally scarred for life. Luke took out his phone with a shaky hand and called the police. The police were over within 5 minutes. A couple of minutes later, medics came over to take the body. The police really couldn't do anything because they hadn't seen the intruder. But then Luke said, "The cameras. We can check the cameras." We ran up the stairs of the house with 2 officers to his dad's room and accessed the security camera footage. The footage was absolutely terrible. Luke's brother was sitting downstairs playing video games, and then a tall, big man kicks down the front door, scaring Luke's brother. When the man sees him, he takes out a pocket knife and approaches Luke's brother. Then, Luke's brother starts screaming in horror. I couldn't look. I looked away in fear of not being able to sleep for decades ahead. Then, I hear from the video, Luke's brother starting to scream. Then, I assume the man stabs him with the knife until he stops screaming. Then he hides his body under the couch and goes through the house, trashing everything. He was in and out of the house within 10 minutes. Luke breaks out into tears and I give him a pat on the back. The police download the footage for evidence and file a police report. They also contact his parents and they come back within 30 minutes. When Luke's parents see their son's body being taken away, they immediately start crying. Luke runs over to them and hugs them. They all cry for minutes. I saw Luke's phone on the ground and used it to call my mom and ask her to pick me up. Luke runs over to them and hugs them. They all cry for minutes. I saw Luke's phone on the ground and used it to call my mom and ask her to pick me up. When she got to Luke's house, I explained everything, and she also started to cry. I couldn't help it, then I started crying. I gave Luke a hug and told him that if he needs anything, he should just call my mom. My mom loaded my bike into the trunk of the car and we drove home. We disabled my phone using the Find My iPhone app. Needless to say, the story is sad and horrifying at the same time. I went to Luke's brother's funeral last week, and it still has me in anguish because I really bonded with his brother. He was just like Luke. He was almost like a brother to me. I haven't been able to sleep for the last few weeks and have been suffering from sleep deprivation. I've been having nightmares of this sick man coming into my room and killing me. I've texted Luke a couple times since then, but he's still processing everything that happened. Even I am. I still can't believe what happened that day. I made the mistake of digging through the dark web one time. I was 15 and in my freshman year of high school. I'd always been a tech nerd and loved computers. A lot of my friends had been talking about the dark web. Even the popular guys were bragging about how they bought weed and cigarettes from the dark web. I really didn't care about weed or drugs, I just wanted to see what the place was. Most of the people were saying that it's dangerous, but as long as you had a VPN and you covered your camera with a piece of tape, you were okay. And I actually believed them, but man was I wrong. One day after finishing my homework, I was bored out of my mind and decided that today would be the day that I'd search the dark web. I did a little bit of research before downloading the designated browser for the dark web called Tor. There were a lot of mixed opinions about the dark web. Most were saying that it's dangerous, but others were saying that there's nothing interesting about the dark web. I installed some free VPN that had good reviews online, and I taped my camera shut and downloaded the browser. I found online that there was a page called a hidden wiki, which is basically a page with a lot of useful links to the dark web. I clicked on a random one called location tracking. Looking back, I probably shouldn't have clicked that link because just the name sounds sketchy. I clicked on it and stayed on the loading screen for more than 2 minutes. At about the 40-second mark, I was starting to get impatient, but I thought that I'd just wait because maybe my internet was slow. After a solid 3 minutes, the page showed up. It was a strange page with some sort of map on the top with lines all over it. I looked closer at the lines. I realized that the lines were getting longer and longer. There were hundreds of lines all over the map. The lines seemed to be following different routes. Not like directions or something like that, but roads around the US. Then I had a pop-up show on my screen. It said, "Allow Tor to use your location?" I foolishly clicked allow. Looking back, I think that my adrenaline level was just so high that I didn't even think about the fact that I clicked allow. I kept scrolling through the page. There were more maps as I scrolled down, maps of different countries. Some were of individual towns. I eventually found a map of my state. The map, again, had many lines seemingly growing longer and following routes. Then I found a map of my town. For whatever reason, my heart dropped. There were only 5 lines in the entirety of my town. I really didn't think much of it because my town's pretty big. After all, I do live in rural Massachusetts and there are miles and miles of open land. I exited out of the site and kept looking at different pages. The rest of my visit to the dark web is pretty uneventful. Most of the sites seem harmless. There were just sites to buy things with Bitcoin for anonymity. I tried to steer clear of the bad things, and I was actually surprisingly able to. A whole hour of scouring the dark web, I got bored and closed Tor. For the next hour, I just played video games on my phone and things like that. Sorry if you were expecting something scary to happen by now. On the next day, I was biking to school, which is only about 5 miles away. I saw a white van tailing me. I brushed it off as a group of contractors or something like that. I made a left turn onto one of the side streets towards my school, and the van took the same left turn. It was a little suspect, but again, it could have been a coincidence. I kept following the side street. There were many opportunities to turn right or left onto main streets, but the van kept going with me. I turned left onto an even quieter road with only trees, and my heart skipped a beat when I saw the van took the same turn. Now this was getting creepy. There were probably 50 different side streets that we could have turned on, and the van just turned onto a random side street with just trees. I instinctively biked a little faster. I could see my school right at the crest of the hill down the road. It was a gut-wrenching feeling as I was approaching the school. Was the van gonna run me over? I pulled into the parking lot of the school and launched my bike. Then I stopped, and I realized how much of a coward I really was being back there. But then I turned around and saw the van slow down, and the driver looked through the tinted window at me, and then continued driving down the road. Now this was actually getting creepy. Luckily, when going back from school, my mom was able to pick me up, so I wouldn't have to worry about being tailed. I looked in the rearview mirror and saw the same white van. That cliche, creepy-looking van tailing us. It followed us all the way home. I didn't tell my mom because I didn't want her to be worried, because that would just make the situation a lot worse. I got out of the car and looked at the van. It again slowed down, and the driver looked at me and then continued down the road. The idea that the person driving the van knew where I lived and where I went to school really scared me. I went inside feeling extra spooked. I closed my shutters and continued doing my work. My dad was out of town for a business trip, and my mom told me that she was going to the grocery store to get some things, and that she'd be back in an hour. After my mom left, I decided to sit down and unwind a little bit before beginning my homework. I saw that same white van stop in front of my house. I literally fell out of my chair in horror. 3 men jumped out of the back with masks on. They began to run to the front door. I ran to the door to lock it and turn off the lights. I took my phone and sat in my closet. For whatever reason, I remembered that I had searched the dark web that night before. It was just some random memory. I took out my phone to dial 911. Then I heard a banging at the front door. It sounded like a battering ram. The small wooden door would not last long. I opened my phone and got a pop-up. It said, "The Tor browser has used your location 300 times in the last day. Would you like to disable location services?" Then my heart sank. I put 2 and 2 together and realized what was happening. These people on the dark web had been tracking me. I dialed 911 in haste and yelled at the operator to send the cops over immediately. The problem with living in a rural area, police response time is slow. It took 10 minutes for the police to arrive. I heard commotion and crashing downstairs for about 7 minutes, though it felt like an eternity. Doors were being slammed and I heard screaming. Then I heard something I'll never forget. I heard one of the men call out my name. That only made the situation 10 times worse. I heard loud, fast footsteps up the stairs. One of the men was upstairs. They opened the door to the adjacent room, and I heard crashing and yelling. The person searched the room for about 2 minutes, and then tried the door to my room. When they realized that the door was locked, they yelled downstairs, "He's in here!" What sounded like 2 more people running up the stairs stopped in front of my door. Then, a very loud bang almost made my heart jump out of my chest. It was the most tense moment in my life. I heard the doorknob fall out, and then the door break down. Then somehow, as if the world was spinning around me, I heard sirens outside. I heard all the men run downstairs simultaneously, and then I heard yelling outside as the officers tackled all the men. I waited a few minutes before getting out of the closet. When I thought it was safe, I got out. My bedroom door had been sliced in half. It was completely broken. I ran out of the house to one of the officers. One of them questioned me while 2 more went inside to search the house. I told the officer about what happened on the dark web, and I gave the URL because luckily I hadn't closed the tab before I closed the Tor browser. The officer took down the URL and advised me to never go back to the dark web again. I called my mom and she came back all worried. I didn't tell her about the dark web because she would just scold me. She gave me a hug and started crying. Even though this was horrifying, it taught me a very important lesson, that nobody is completely anonymous on the internet, even with a VPN. Please stay away from the dark web at all costs, and if some random app on your phone is tracking your location, fix it as soon as possible.